And we're joined now by CBS News cybersecurity expert and analyst Chris Krebs, who is the former director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Good to have you back.
Good to be back.
So in our polling that we just carried out in Arizona in particular, it was a center of election denialism back in 2020, and we're seeing this again. I mean, nearly half of Trump's supporters say the 2024 presidential results in Arizona should be investigated and challenged if Biden wins. 7 in 10 from those who identify themselves as MAGA. Is this going to be a repeat of 2020? I mean, what's going to happen?
Well, all these claims are despite any credible evidence being presented in the courts or, to everyone else and the experts out there. We're continuing to see claims of problems with 2020, even 2022, the midterms. So I think the incentive structures, the way they're aligned right now, it creates plenty of room and a permissive environment for those to allege that there are problems, again, despite any credible evidence and continued investments in election security, election resilience, modernizing election systems. Back in 2020, we talked about having 95% or so of ballots, cast on paper. Now that number is probably closer to 98. So we have made improvements over the last several years.
It's interesting you make that point about paper because on the campaign trail, Donald Trump claims 2020 was rigged, claims 2024 might be as well. Listen to what he just said.
Our goal on election will be one-day voting with paper ballots, proof of citizenship, and voter ID. It's very simple. If you want to save America in your Second Amendment, register, get an absentee or mail-in ballot, vote early or vote on election day. I don't care.
So two things there. Now he is for mail-in ballots. He was against them in 2020. But you just said there already is a paper trail. He's saying there is none.
The vast majority of votes cast in the United States right now are with a paper trail. There is a small percentage that are recorded down on election systems, but that's for accessibility purposes, for those that may have visual impairment or otherwise. And it's important to ensure open and accessible voting processes. The one-day voting, this push, this drive, it's actually counterproductive. It actually is counter to participation in the democratic system and resilience and security. That longer run-up, the weeks, month, in advance of the election, it allows us to detect if there are any issues, get on top and fix them. If you had an election on one single day, life happens first. Somebody might get sick, you could get in a car accident, you might not be able to get to the polls. But if something happens early on, it could have this cascading catastrophic impact on getting people to the polls and voting on election day. So I'm much more in favor of the system we have now with early voting, with mail-in and absentee ballots.
So the Director of National Intelligence, your successor at CISA, Jenna Easterly, also testified that they are so prepared, election infrastructure has never been more secure. But then we also hear from U.S. intelligence that China, for example, is experimenting with things like generative AI to influence voters. How do people understand that influence effort versus actually tinkering with ballots?
I think that's the right distinction. There's interference, which is the technical manipulation of systems. And as Jen Easterly, my successor at CISA, said earlier this week in the Senate hearing, the investments we're making, the continued improvements across systems, I would even suggest that when we said in 2020 that it was a safe and secure election, it's even more safe, secure now because those continued investments, because the continued improvements across those systems. But to your point on influence, the scope, the scale, the technology available to our adversaries, including AI and deepfakes, it is a much more precarious threat environment. The Chinese are active. The Russians are very active. They've been using deepfakes in Europe. We've seen AI pop up in Moldova, Slovakia, else Bangladesh. So it is going to be a tool. My sense, however, though, is threats that are AI-powered or AI-enabled will be much like what happened in New Hampshire with the robocall. It'll be immediately detected, it will be investigated quickly, and it will be prosecuted. And that's what's happening right now. I think the biggest concern, though, is that this is cumulative. It's accretive. So rather than one single catastrophic AI-enabled event, it's going to be a steady drumbeat where the voters, the public, are just going to lose confidence and trust in the overarching information ecosystem.
And we're seeing that in our polling already.
Some might say that's part of a strategy.
That's scary.
Absolutely.
CNN was reporting both the Chinese and Iranian governments had tried to use fake AI content back in 2020, but chose not to deploy it. Is that accurate?
I can't speak to the specific intelligence there. It should not be a surprise, though. We've been talking about deep fakes and AI as a risk vector for years, for half a decade at least. So to say that whether it's the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, the North Koreans, whomever, have been tinkering or researching this technology as recently as 4 years ago, I think that's entirely credible. We are seeing it now, though. We are seeing, as I mentioned, already in Europe. We're seeing it here as well. And I would expect that between now and the election, we will continue to see AI-created content pop up. And this is where it's important for the tech platforms to ensure they're on the lookout for it,
right,
that the AI companies are ensuring that their platforms cannot be manipulated. The challenge, of course, though, is there are open source models that can be used.
And we need to keep talking to you about this, unfortunately, in the months to come, because it sounds like it'll be a persistent issue.